Okay, if you're all ready, we will start the regular meeting. Anybody need a break? All right. Okay, if you will call the roll, please.
Ms. Ragu?
Here.
Mr. Bracken?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Franklin?
Here.
Ms. French?
Here.
Mr. Prethridge?
Here.
Mayor Snavely?
Here. If you'd like to join us, we're going to do the pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Agenda's approved. We'll start with public participation, and the first one is a notice to legislative authority. They are moving a
Liquor
license, which is hopeful to me that maybe something will go into that building.
Transfer of a liquor license from, what's the name of the restaurant?
It's into,
Sushinara. It used to be Sushinara.
now it's going to go to the Benjamin Harrison building.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion that we receive it without comment? So moved. Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's passed. And we will move to public comments from the public. And if anyone wishes to address council on items that are not on the agenda, or if they're not on the consent agenda, please come forward at this time. Give us your name and where you live for the record. And we look forward to hearing from you. Ann, you're up.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Ann Fuhrer, I live on Dana Drive in Southern Knowles. I'm one of 4 facilitators for a local community-based planning coalition, Oxford Area Solutions for Housing. Yesterday evening, one of our other facilitators, Jenny Baylor, forwarded to members of council and to staff in the city manager's office a copy of a document we compiled recently, a report to the community of our activities from last July through January 2024. The report included a summary of the results of our point-in-time count conducted during the week of December 11th. A story about our activities was included in last Thursday's Oxford Observer, focusing on the importance of the availability of housing vouchers to Oxford residents so that they can become better able to afford housing in the area. OSH is now registered as a nonprofit corporation in the state of Ohio. We have an employer identification number, and we are working to develop bylaws and apply for 501c3 status with the IRS, increasing the flexibility we have and opportunities available to us. Several members of City Council and City staff have participated in our efforts, and we thank you for that collaboration. If you look at some of the most successful efforts to prevent and respond to homelessness across the country, you'll see that those efforts require cross-sector coalitional commitment. OSH is in good company. Last Friday evening, I was on a panel with Mayor Snavely and Assistant City Manager Green, as well as 2 other very busy members of the community. Shauna Rosenberg, founder of Thread Up Oxford and member of several commissions, and Amy Masechko, director of the Coalition for a Healthy Community, Oxford area, and other roles. We were kicking off the annual Social Innovation Weekend coordinated by Michael Conger, a faculty member in entrepreneurship at Miami. When asked to identify what Oxford's got going for it, the first question, all 5 of us gave what I heard as similar responses. Good people, working hard, individually and in relationships, organizations, and coalitions. And we have many examples of that to point to in the community. What that suggests to me is that there are many people who care deeply and are committed to contributing to the health and well-being of their neighbors and have a lot to contribute when important decisions are being made. I sat in on the city's work session earlier this evening, and since there was no opportunity for public comment there, I offer now that most members of the public care deeply about the safety of all of our neighbors, adequate staffing to provide services promised by the city, and equitable funding for staffing and services. I believe that an opportunity for we good people to engage in public conversations with decision makers about proposals, especially when it's about increasing taxes, although funding in general, before we are asked to vote on a ballot issue would be prudent. And I am really glad that you built that into your proposal and that you're discussing that and recognizing the importance of that. And I would offer up myself certainly, but others who are involved in leadership roles in local organizations to help with coordination, with planning, with scheduling, anything we can do, because there's going to be a lot of response to suggesting an increase in taxes. But I'm really glad that you talked about that quite a bit over that 45-minute period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to address the council? Ann?
Good evening.
Give us your name and
Apologize.
where you live.
Yes, my name is Ann Bailey. I am here
And you
as a
live in
citizen.
Oxford.
Yes,
Thanks.
I live at 192 Stone Creek Drive, Oxford, Ohio, and currently serve as leader of the Eradicating Systemic Poverty team of Oxford, as well as one of 4 facilitators of the Oxford Area Solutions for Housing, also known as OSH. And I'm not here to plead with you for a vote for anything tonight. I'm just here to give an informational kind of announcement. The economy and business sector of OSH is planning a meeting that I wanted you to be aware of on March 18th. It will be at the Seminary Building at the corner of Church and Poplar. And this is a meeting that is primarily to serve property owners in our community, but also is open to anyone who would like to come, and that would include people who are seeking rental property with the option of using a housing voucher. In other words, the meeting will be an informational meeting about the housing choice voucher, sometimes known as HCV. And this is not something that we will be asking city money for or county money for. This is a federal program, and the idea is to inform property owners in our community and elsewhere of what they need to do, which is not very much. It's basically having your property ready and approved by a board in the county, the Butler County Metropolitan Housing Authority. And the idea is to help property owners in our community know that what's required of them, and also to communicate to the community that in the very near future, with the help of OSH, we will have an access point for persons who qualify for a housing choice voucher to apply and be eligible for this. So this is just information, and we want you to know that this is another step that we're taking to support the community.
Thank you, Ann. And thank you and all of the facilitators and all the people who've come together to work on OSH and try and make something happen for people who need it. So thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to address council tonight? Okay, thank you very much. We will move to the consent agenda, and I would entertain a motion to approve it.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any items to be removed for our discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Consent agenda is approved. We'll move to resolutions, and you can read the first one.
A resolution placing a moratorium not to exceed 6 months on new short-term rentals within the city of Oxford, Ohio.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt this resolution? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And we've got Sam.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Good evening, council members. Based on the discussions we've had with council and various boards and commissions over the past several months, we're bringing forward what's called a moratorium for the general public's knowledge to put a temporary hold on something in order to do some research and analysis on an important issue to council, which is regarding short-term rentals, Airbnb, transient guest lodging. It's been called several things over the past several years, so we have existing policy in place that regulates those. Council, as you know, would like us to do some additional changes to those, and with regard to the dominance of them and potential growth of them in existing neighborhoods. And we're looking at some potential code, but we don't have anything ready at this point, so a moratorium would put a hold on any new short-term rental applications. So we have a form ready to go that would go in effect tomorrow and be ready for applicants that want to open a regular rental, but not any new short-term rentals. And so this would allow us to do that. So happy to answer your questions.
This doesn't affect people who already have
Correct.
an Airbnb.
Yes, so we've got around 40 or so that are already permitted and licensed, and many of those are remitting lodging tax under the current policy. And those would be able to remain and continue. But any that would be applied for after this date would not be able to proceed until any new regulations are in effect or the moratorium is over. 6 months is what we've proposed. We feel like that's plenty of time to bring any changes back to you for a full vote.
Super, thank you, Sam. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address this resolution? Okay. Counselors, comments? David?
Well, I want to thank, thank staff for putting this together and getting to this point. I mean, I think we have a fairly clear idea of what we want to do, but I think it's important to kind of, moratorium hits the pause button so that we can adopt new regulations. People aren't rushing to beat the clock. And I think this is good. I mean, I had one shared, though, some concern in language that I thought we could substitute, because the findings didn't really talk about what the problem is. It kind of talked about, I would like to make a motion. I understood the opinion from staff, but there seems to be an interpretation issue. I really don't think our code, according to that one thing, like, I do not believe our existing regulations do not prohibit homes from being purchased. I think that there's a difference of opinion. I had some alternative language here. I think either we substitute my language or we just strike that all together, because I think, so, anyway, we'll get in my motion in a minute. I think this is really good. I do think, however, we need to be really clear to people, because this is a blanket moratorium, but I don't think we have any intention, maybe I'm wrong, of doing anything to change the status of the people who are just renting out a room. The traditional customary practice. So I want, because I got some messages from people, are you guys going to ban that? Like, so while it's a broad moratorium, I think ultimately the policy is going to be very targeted, as I understand it, to prohibiting, Airbnbs not accessory to a principal use, not accessory to a primary use. So anyway, I'll stop.
And I suppose there's no way to tailor that so that it's just for standalone short-term rentals for the moratorium?
I think that's pretty difficult to do.
That was my hope, but I don't know that it's administratively possible.
How do we know there aren't going to be more short-term rentals? Or like, how do we know the moratorium's going to work?
It comes down to the licensing. So if there's not a
That could
license
be a
for
waiver.
it, the operation of it is prohibited. So while they may think that they're allowed to continue or be grandfathered, if they don't have the license, then if the use is actively going on, then it cannot continue.
Oh, so the 35 places that do not have a permit would then have to stop?
If we're aware of them and we conduct enforcement, we don't have the staff nor the knowledge to knock on people's doors and find out what's going on behind closed doors. But we're in the process of purchasing data to find out a little bit more about that based on the addresses, as we discussed in the work session. Talking with the law director, we don't believe that it's necessary to make the changes you've proposed, because a moratorium would be, it's not a change in the ordinance, it's a resolution, so it doesn't change the interpretation of the zoning code. But if that's something that as a group you want to do, there's no real harm in that.
Can I ask Chris to?
Yeah, so I think it's a technical issue more than a substantive one. When I looked at this yesterday, my first reaction is, sure, we can go ahead and do that. But then when I thought about it more, I realized what we're really doing is changing the code through a resolution. And if someone, where do people go to find out what the Oxford laws are? They go to the code. They don't go to a resolution. So somebody wouldn't be on notice of what this interpretation would be because it's a resolution. And I think that leads an issue of the essential process of what laws are supposed to be noticed, and people need to understand that. And so that's my convoluted answer, but when I started thinking about it more, it's really just a text amendment to what the existing code is, because it's clarification. So if we wanted to do something, we would need to change the language in the existing code.
Well, I think that's, the moratorium is to allow us the time.
Right, but the proposed amendments that Councilor Prithridge, I think, said yesterday, and asked to look at it in advance, I was addressing that issue.
Oh,
Okay.
So, I mean-
The moratorium itself is absolutely appropriate, and I do believe it should be a blanket moratorium.
And I assume that whenever we have the language before us and we pass it, then the moratorium could end early.
Yeah, so it doesn't
Yes.
need to take 6
It
months.
doesn't have to be
Correct.
6 months.
So here's just my question though, because I think there's been debate about the language, and you say that I'm changing the code, but when I say that our codified ordinance only permits short-term rentals as an accessory use associated with the principal use, you go back to the code and it says transient guest lodging is allowed as an accessory use only in, so I'm just rephrasing the code. But my point is if we went with the language that staff has crafted, which says, existing regulations do not prohibit homes from being purchased for the sole purpose of short-term rental usage. It's in a resolution. Could someone come to us and say, that's basically an interpretation of the code? And that they could say, no, you can't retroactively enforce on this because you've said categorically it doesn't prohibit. And that, I think, is a matter of interpretation, more so than my statement is, which is my opinion.
I would agree with that, but also we can address this by just striking it.
Yeah, that's
And
what
we
I'm
don't
saying.
make an opinion on it.
That-
We're not, that we're just not interpreting.
Yeah, because that was my worry too. It
Yeah.
could then be precedent setting if we
Yeah.
acknowledged it.
So, yeah, you
So
said
the
that they're not
fourth from the
prohibited.
bottom, whereas. Ultimately, I don't think whereases are.
Yeah, that's my only question. Could it come back to us that someone basically said, you've interpreted your code in this resolution, whereas, and yeah, this thing I had is not prohibited?
But also, there's no benefit in keeping it anyway.
Yeah.
So if you strike it.
It doesn't hurt anything.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, so I guess if I were to make a motion, it would just be that we strike it. It's the simplest thing.
Why don't you make?
That's
the
fine.
motion
Okay.
so
That's
we
fine,
can move
yeah.
forward?
All right, so
The whereas are just preambles.
okay.
Yeah, right.
I just don't want anything to come back and bite us in the butt later, because we had a whereas. So if that's the case, then I would move that we strike the whereas that currently reads, existing regulations do not prohibit. Okay.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
I guess my question would be about if we don't have, and we're openly admitting we do not have the ability to regulate this, if we can't regulate it, even if it's for standalone or not standalone, whatever, like a blanket moratorium, I just have a hard time, because I do believe that people, like you said, I agree with you, I think people should be able to supplement their income by renting out a room. And we have no idea, up to 6 months, that could be a lot for some people. So if we don't even have the ability to regulate this as like a blanket moratorium, can we not have language in there for like a standalone? You know what I mean? Like,
No, I don't.
like making it a little bit more tailored so that we're just putting a moratorium on standalone Airbnbs. And I understand the rationale that.
There's nothing in our code
No,
that says.
there's no definition. We have no definitions.
We don't
But,
have any definition.
yes, but,
Yeah.
but I mean, let's deal with the motions one at a time, because I do have a second motion, which is some language that I thought could get at that. It may or may not be administratively enforceable. So, like, that's what my second amendment is to use our, use our existing code to be clear.
Okay, so let's stick with the motion that's on the table, which is to strike the whereas that's fourth from the bottom, whereas existing regulations.
So this is just for the amendment, it's not for the
That's,
whole thing going
we're
forward.
just talking about this amendment.
Just making it clear.
Does anybody have any comments or questions on this amendment? Okay. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that's gone.
So my
Now-
second amendment was to get Councilor Chantel Ragu's point, which is instead of the blanket thing that says no new short-term rental shall be permitted or licensed within the city of Oxford. Again, I don't know whether it's administratively, but to try to say no short-term rental shall be permitted or licensed, adding as principal uses within the city of Oxford, and only those accessory to a primary use may be permitted or licensed. That captures what our code tries to say, so if someone wants to start renting out their bedroom, hypothetically, but it could be administratively, we're not ready with the affidavit process and all that stuff, so that would, I mean, that would capture, to me, slice and dice it, but it may not be administratively workable, so.
Yeah, so essentially you're saying instead of a blanket moratorium, it would be specific only to non-secondary uses, primary uses. So you couldn't, for example, what we just struck is buy homes for the sole purpose of short-term rentals, which is what you're getting at. And I would be for that.
'Cause we,
Are you gonna second it then?
If that was a.
Well, that was, yeah, that was, I mean, here's my motion, which is
Please.
we add the language again, so it's, section 2 shall read, no new short-term rental shall be permitted or licensed as principal uses within the city of Oxford, and only those accessory to a primary residence may be permitted or licensed. You know, yeah, I mean, I believe that's within what our current code says but with the distinction of accessory and principal use, primary use, but, so that's my.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Chris, look like you have a comment.
Well, I'm concerned. I think if you're going to do that, you might need to change the caption on the resolution. Because the caption on the resolution reads as a blanket moratorium.
We can make another amendment right now, eh?
But there wasn't adequate notice.
We also delay putting it into effect? Because I was also worried about that because we don't want to rush at people trying to beat the deadline.
I
but
think
also
we
there
need
might
more
be-
time to evaluate the impacts of this change before we,
We've already got some people that,
which could mean more applications.
yeah.
People are gonna go crazy now trying to buy properties, and this is property buying season.
How
I
fast
think
is
we
that
need to
process?
pass something tonight. That's my opinion.
Well, that's the other thing. If we pass something tonight that's even a blanket one, we can come back in a future session and call it early and change.
If
Well, I think we
problem.
should, yeah, I mean, if it's
It's a problem.
But it also, I guess what I would say is that I don't wanna signal to people the wrong thing, but if we do this moratorium, and then, it sounds like the legislation that you're contemplating is a relatively simple fix,
Mhm.
right? So it doesn't need to be 6 months, you know, it could be a matter of weeks or months before we actually see the primary legislation, and if that's the case, if the accessory use person has to hold on for a little while, for a few weeks or months, it's fine. So I don't want this to be, I'd rather have the expedience. I do think we need to start just parsing the distinction between these things, which we have not been able to do
I hear that as, I'm gonna withdraw this.
today. I'm gonna withdraw the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, is there further discussion on this resolution?
I just feel like if staff's put the time into crafting it the way it is, they thought through some of this, and like you said, it doesn't have to take 6 months. I think simpler is better.
It's not permanent, we can come back to it. I'm very torn on this whole issue, but I don't mind a moratorium that lets us get some time to think about this and address it appropriately.
And I mean, I guess I just want to signal to people, and people are asking the question, no, this is not you renting out for a few weekends, big Miami weekends, you know, this is the principal use, the house purchased. So whatever that policy comes back to us by its wording, that's, I believe, our intent.
It is.
Well, and I appreciate Mayor Snavely's comments that for those who are already
They're fine.
we're not gonna make you stop doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because I appreciated the couple of emails that we received as council where folks were talking about how supportive it is for them and the fact that they promote local businesses. I think that's great, and thank you for doing that. But I think, yeah, so just again, clarifying out loud, this is only a blanket moratorium for new, not current.
Right. Now I've forgotten the question I had for you.
How soon are we going to bring it back?
Well, why don't you answer that, and maybe I'll remember what it was I was going to say. But I focus on listening, and I don't
Yeah, sorry.
focus on keeping my thought.
Well, being that it would be zoning, so it would have to go through planning commission, which would take a little bit of time, but it wouldn't be 6 months. And what we had talked about internally was an affidavit requirement stating that this is the primary residence owner occupancy, and that would be something in the administrative process. So more in the 2 to 3 month range at the max.
Okay.
However, that would still be getting really close to graduation, which I know is a popular season. So.
Well, this was really excellent that you took the time to explain that. A, it needed to be said, but B, it gave me time to remember what I was going to ask
Trying to
you,
help you out.
Which is, if this is passed, can we send some sort of notification to real estate agents so that they know about it and they don't have to guess about it or hear it through the
I
grapevine?
think we might have a contact group for, okay.
Okay.
And then a lot of the realtors are, subscribing to the e-news, so.
They're networked.
If we can do a targeted,
I think that
plus
would be
the regular
helpful.
e-news.
Yeah, plus
Yeah.
the general one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just as a general question, are there a lot of realtors who use short-term rentals?
There's a handful, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
plus
that
they
are
would
pretty
be
active with
selling
it.
houses.
Yeah.
And telling people, this is an investment property. You can use this as a standalone Airbnb and make big money instead of somebody, like a family, living in the house.
We only know of a couple for sure that have been purchased for this reason. There could be others. I think most of them are where people have, somebody's passed away or someone's been gone for a long time and it's just turned into that. They didn't buy it for that reason, but there's a couple that were bought for that reason, which is what your concern has been, and so, which is why we're here tonight. So it may grow, we don't know.
But we need to protect.
When you see something advertised on billboards, it's a real thing. So thank you, Sam, for putting this together.
Is there any further comment or discussion? All those in favor of the resolution indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Resolution is adopted. Could you please read the second?
A resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a new commitment with the Electrification Coalition to receive technical assistance related to electric vehicle infrastructure and policy.
Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Sam?
Thank you again. Rena Murphy, our sustainability coordinator, brought this to our attention, that there's a potential really good partnership through an existing partnership we already have. And this involves my department in the sense of permitting and from a development and builder side of things, making properties and buildings potentially EV ready. So this group has worked with the City of Columbus, and they're looking to work with others. And with an existing partnership, we would have free access to their services. So this agreement would just allow us to do that in a more intentional way. There's a mention in there about fleet as well, and so that's part of the standard agreement with this coalition. Obviously, that would only be for situations where there is a vehicle available that could serve that need, which is not very common, as you know, but we would still pursue that if possible.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address this resolution? Councilors, any comments or questions?
I guess I would just say this is the power. I know that we have tight budgets, but meaning the city manager, found money in the budget to create a sustainability coordinator position. And the value of people is they enable you to expand your capacity. So I think that position, is going to yield, return on that investment in grants and things like that. So I'm happy to see this moving forward on this kind of stuff.
Any other comments? Glad to see it moving forward. Are you ready to vote? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Resolution is adopted. And you can read our third resolution.
A resolution authorizing the city manager to amend the professional services project contract with Bear Becker Incorporated for the realignment and design of Oxford Area Trail System Phase 5 at a cost of $798,164 plus additional expenses in the amount of $113,267 for a total cost not to exceed $911,431.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. And Jessica?
Good
We
afternoon.
listen to people, don't we?
We do. I'm substituting for Mr. Dreisbach this evening. In March, we had entered into a contract with Bayer Becker to do the design and engineering for Phase 5 of the Oxford Area Trail. And that will connect the high school over to the middle school and then travel north to the Chestnut Fields connector. There we go. Took a minute. And so it's from here, you can kind of see it. It does come down a little bit from the high school. It comes all the way over, and then it shoots north up to that new multimodal facility. We heard a lot of public comment from the residents in Silverleaf and Gardenia about not wanting it kind of on the right-of-way in front of their houses. And so we also, we took that comment and we went back to Bayer Becker and we said, all right, what would it take to re-examine a new route? And the answer would be an expansion of the contract in the amount of $113,267. And so we're coming to you tonight to expand the contract for a new amount, not to exceed in total $911,431. And that will allow for the design and engineering of a new north route that will kind of move it away from the front of the houses onto this private property and kind of into, it's going to tuck it into the woods a bit as you travel north. I do need to be open that that is on private property still, and we would need to negotiate with that property owner. Where it is now is on public right-of-way, so it was free. And so there will be a later added expense as well with property acquisition, but we haven't yet begun those negotiations. But I bring this forward tonight for your discussion.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address this resolution? Okay, counselors? So this is behind Glenn's house rather than in front of it.
So my question is, so you're going to negotiate with the private property owner later, but you're aware that the private property owner is open to it?
I can't speak for the property owner, but so far they have been generally supportive of the Oxford Area Trail project. But when it gets into like the exact alignment on their property, it's yet to be discussed. And we're not allowed to discuss it until we have an approved route from ODOT. So it does get a little, we have to kind of wait sometimes.
Okay.
So, I mean, Mayor Stanley's probably going to say we do listen to the people, and I think that I think this outcome is going to be better for the trail. I think the trail experience is going to be better. I think it's a marginally more direct connection to the high school. What I would say about this, however, is that, and I have utmost respect for the way we go about things. The outcome is good, but if we had gone to the public with 30% design instead of 60% design, this change would have been less expensive. You know, I mean, I think that when we do, Sam Perry and I are urban planners. You learn in planning school, you set the goal, you evaluate a range of alternatives, and then you go to public comment on that. And I think that developing and engineering a preferred alternative and then having to change is more expensive than going to the public with a range of alternatives and then engineering them. I think it's going to cost us a little extra. It will be worth it in the end, but I think maybe there's a lesson learned in that about how we do public comment around some of the phases. So, but I'm going to be happy. It's going to be beautiful. So thanks to Mike, who's not here, for coming up with a better solution.
Okay, any other questions or comments? You ready to vote? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution is adopted. We have no first or second reading of ordinances, which is about the first time I can recall that happening. So we do have a discussion item, which was based on a question that was raised in public comment and a communication that was sent to us, and that is a possible amendment to the rules of council. Do you want to talk about that, Doug, or? I don't know who should talk about it.
Well, I can start. Basically, when I came here in 2007, we had rules that were revised in 2006, and in 2022, as we know, we revised them again. The only change we made then was that we added the Pledge of Allegiance, which was not in there in our order of business. So, you know, the rules of council have pretty much been the same for years. They basically serve to help us conduct our meeting and do it in a way that's efficient and, shall we say, genial to the public, so the public knows what our expectations are. You know, it provides guidelines for dealing lawfully with the issues that we have. So I believe the recommendation we had was to allow questions to be asked, but I guess I feel that council, you know, we provide that opportunity at the beginning of the meeting to make comments. They can ask questions, and then during the agenda items, a person can ask questions too if they so desire. I think the main issue was, I believe the gentleman, Mr. Chafin, had asked that we answer those questions in a certain period of time or something to that effect. You know, a lot of times if it's a pertinent question to a subject we're discussing, you know, we can do that if we're prepared for it. But, you know, the main thing is that our rules help us conduct our business and like I said, an efficient manner so that the public has an expectation of what's going to happen when we post the meeting. And so, yeah, hopefully that
Yeah, I mean,
starts
I
the
guess my
discussion.
question to all of you would be, what problem would this be solving? I've been mayor and conducted meetings for quite a few years, over several decades. There have been questions asked, and almost, I would say, the majority of those public comments have included questions. And I think that any serious question that was asked was answered either immediately with staff at that meeting or shortly after. We might ask, hey, staff, would you please address this question that was asked? So I guess what I would ask you all is whether you think there's a significant problem that we need to fix by this proposed change.
So I asked for this agenda item, so if I could jump in, Mr. Chaffin had asked for this, and from having spoken to him and his comments, I mean, I think it was about that if the public comes to city council and they have an inquiry or they want to ask a question, are they kind of owed an answer, kind of in principle? I mean, I say, yes, we do answer the questions, but sometimes we do say to people, this is not a time for conversation, and we move on for that.
And this change would not change that.
Well, I think the part, and so I think that one of the things, and I, as I say this, a person who does not always respond to my emails as timely or as completely as I should, but I know if I'm a member of the public, I can remember those times in which, as a citizen, I've made an inquiry of the city, of the mayor, of the city manager, and if I never, I can remember 15 years ago, emails sent that were ignored. You know, and I think that's just not the way. Like, I think what Mr. Chaffin's saying is we're kind of making a commitment to provide answers to questions, which I think citizens are owed. I think the question becomes, and you know, we were talking about this, Bill, is that most meetings are like this, where someone makes an inquiry, we can either answer, we're like, okay, that's a good question, we'll either answer it, get back to you. If you're up here, you also do know sometimes that room is full of a lot of people who are going to speak for 5 minutes each, and they could hit you with 15 different questions per 5 minutes, and that becomes unworkable. And so, I guess the question is, and I think under Mr. Chaffin's language, when he says may ask questions and that people get answered, that makes me a little nervous. But I think sometimes we design rules around the worst case scenario when that's only 0.25% of the time. You know, so to me, when I look at Mr. Chaffin's recommend, like if I were, for example, to substitute and ask questions and make an inquiry, if a person could make an inquiry every time they got up here with their 5 minutes, I think we could commit to answering that. You know, you get one question, make it a good one, we'll get an answer back to you. If you ask 15 questions in rapid fire, sorry, we can't do that. So, you know, based on his language, I could support something that would basically, in those places where it says, you know, people can address the council and speak and make an inquiry on any matter, or when they oral presentations. What's that?
They can do that now.
I think that is true, but I think the substance of what Mr. Chaffin is saying is at the end, you know, the council currently says council being under no obligation to respond specifically to any speaker, period. You know, he's suggested that we say at that time, but an appropriate response to inquiry or to a question shall be made by council or staff within a reasonable time. That's the substantive change, that we commit to answering a question.
What's considered reasonable?
Well, but this is but the thing, yeah, I think, do we worry about the worst case scenario?
There's a litigation opportunity.
Well, I mean, I think that the context for something like that would be along the lines of what a public records request is. The Ohio law requires a reasonable amount of time based upon the complexity of the answer. And the answer. So I think that you trust that people will perform that duty in good faith, and to put anything more behind it would potentially lead to hardship if that information required in-depth research.
I guess my comment is, we've been through some difficult meetings with some people who were, I don't want to characterize them, but I would say that they were mad, and I think if they see this as their loophole, if I were one of them, I would come to council and I would use my 5 minutes to give 75 questions, and then the next person would stand up and they'd give 75 other questions. And then the next person would ask for, well, maybe only 50 questions. I just think that it has the potential to eat up staff time and slow us down and change the whole nature of public comment.
But what if a person were able to make an inquiry each time they had a public comment?
Well, they can.
They can, they can come into.
I know.
People do it every time.
But the question is do we feel under any obligation to answer a citizen's question?
I think we do. Any serious question that anybody comes up with, we have answered. I would like to have somebody tell me, somebody who's come forward with a question that council has not tried to answer. What is the problem we're trying to solve?
I mostly agree. I don't think we could obligate ourselves to this because any of us who lived through COVID, we saw bad faith questions, we saw loaded questions, we saw questions based on faulty or totally unverifiable facts. Not even internal information about what's going on here, but like resolve epidemiology for us in this minute, right?
Yes.
I think it has to go, I think the best thing is, because we can't always answer questions in real time, but if you email each of us, we are hopefully very responsive to any reasonable question. If we're not, I think you should be voting us out.
I think
but
I
don't
have
think
responded to every email that has been sent to me since I've been mayor.
I certainly have not, because some of them are
Well, you
some
know
of the things
that
I
I
just
will do
listed
it
off. But I respond to anyone that I think is earnest and has some merit, absolutely. And if I don't respond to them, then they should feel free to take my non-response as a means of not voting for me in the next election.
I mean, I guess I feel like the spirit behind it is trying to get more community engagement. And a part of it feels almost like we're, not saying that this is how you are feeling, but it's almost like we're not good council members, you know, like we're operating in bad faith. And I definitely don't feel like that about any one of us. And I don't know. I wish that if the spirit is about community engagement, I wish we could think about ways that people who are home with their families could attend meetings and ask questions. I would love that. I would love that because it is so hard to be able to be in this room. So how can we imagine including even more people in the conversation? So not necessarily interjecting, like, because I agree with Bill that we try. I think we try really hard, and maybe there's some times where we miss or we don't have an answer, but I think that we're operating in good faith. But I would love to continue this conversation of let's be creative in ways that we can get people who can't be in this room to be able to talk to us on a one-to-one, on a basis where they're included in the meeting versus just having to send an email that may get overlooked. So I would be curious about that, and I do feel that while I understand where you're coming from, I think that that is a way to engage even more of the residents, if that makes sense.
I agree. And for example, I've had personal meetings about questions on council with about 50% of the audience right now. So some of us are very responsive, but if we have that obligation for people who aren't in good faith, I think it becomes highly problematic if we obligate ourselves to it.
And think about COVID with shelter in place. Think about how much more engagement we had. Did we have long meetings? Yes, we did. But we had people that were coming to meetings and could talk to us on agenda items that could never be in the room. So I would love to investigate that to see, like, how can
I
we,
think that's regulated by the state, but I don't know.
Yeah, we still
That's
have to
been a
have
problem.
public meetings.
Chris?
but not necessarily comments, right? Because their comments get into the public record via email or whatnot. So why can they not have a virtual Zoom be inserted into the meeting and us being able to react to it in real time?
I don't think you can do that. Now, we have GovOS where they can send comments, and we get lots of those.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you just don't see their face, but
But it's just, I don't know, it's a way to use technology in a way that is not in the 1900s, you know? So you incorporating this technology so that we can engage even more residents. So I just, and whatever the law is, I don't know. But I think that if we can incorporate an email into the public record, and I understand the difference because you're putting it into the whatever and we're having a chance to read it before we can respond. A person on a computer talking to us right before an agenda item is so much more impactful, I think, than an email that is sent to us. And they can watch our reaction and watch, or whatever. I'm opening up a can of worms. I understand where you're coming from. I think that, I do think that we're good faith actors, and I think that we can look at even more ways to engage more people and engage in conversation that doesn't necessarily add something that is going to be so vague so about the reasonable time. And I do think that it's going to fall on Heather, I think, to respond all day long to the questions and research. I think that is what will happen.
But I guess, yeah, I recall on November 28th, Peggy Brandstrader sent us all an email that asked us to the city manager, and we're talking about RFPs and electrification, and she said, has the city included requirements for building orientation? You know, I spoke to Peggy, but I don't know whether she received any official response. It was a very thoughtful email, and I believe it may have gone unanswered by the city. And so I'm not saying we need to oblige. Maybe we don't oblige ourselves, and okay, we're not going to tie our hands. But if citizens make thoughtful inquiries, I think I could see how frustrating it would be from a city to be like, you know, crickets. So whether it's here, I guess, if it doesn't require, I mean, if I take your point, Mayor Snavely, that we do this already, we try already, and if we're not going to change the code, then let's make sure to do it voluntarily.
I think that's a very good idea.
Because I do think it's easy for us up here because we kind of talk. I mean, the structure is not a really dialogue. You know, even our work sessions, we're here, people can listen, they can't really. I benefit from hearing, be challenged, and even when the questions I think are not reasonable, like I think the citizen has a right to ask us a question and deserves us to endeavor to answer it.
Well, I think one problem we have with that GovOS form is a lot of them, I feel, were directed to council, but we probably should put on there, is this directed to the council or the staff? And differentiate that, because I would feel free to answer the ones that are, and I will answer the ones that come to my attention. But when it goes to council, I'm feeling like they're wanting input from council on that. And my door's open all the time. I meet with a lot of people, and, you know, we deal with a lot of public records requests. I don't know that we probably should give you a report on those and all the ones that Heather's having to deal with. You know, it's taking up a lot of staff time. We do our very best to answer them, but in just talking about this form with Peggy's, I thought it was directed to council, because I would have answered and said.
So nobody answered it.
Well, didn't you say you met with her?
Well, I spoke to her,
Doesn't that count?
but I waited for, you know, I mean, I speak to her, but again, I'm waiting.
I can speak to this directly. So I know Peggy well. She's on two of the boards. I'm on those 2 boards and 2 others in which I brought up this topic. I bring it up all the time. I brought it up before. She's been great, though, because she helps bring public pressure, which is good. And also, she brings very specific ideas on how we can get there and what we might implement. But this is not something that went unanswered at all.
No.
It's not from me.
No, I know, but it was about an RFP of things that we ourselves are not writing. I mean, and so, like, I'm not sure who the right person to answer is. I think that's.
And
Yeah.
I come to think of it, I think I had a staff member that did answer that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if that's
think
the,
there
that's the
were.
case, I didn't know that, and so I'm hoping that we are doing that.
So here's the point that we're at. I think if somebody has a recommendation for a change in council rules, that you should identify what that is and ask for that to be on the agenda. That's all we can do tonight is to request, and go ahead, Amber.
Well, I do want to say thank you to Mr. Chaffin, because sometimes people bring problems to us without possible solutions, and you took the time to write out a possible solution, and we appreciate that. I'm not supportive of changing the rules, however, and I think that protecting staff time is important. I know we see when City Manager Elliott loops us into emails that he received that we didn't receive, but he CCs us on them, so we're in the loop. We have had people come and ask us questions. There was a woman who came to talk about, she was concerned about registered sex offenders. Remember that? And there were like several questions. I think that if we're bound to answer all of them, even though they are being addressed like in a larger scale with all of the different meetings that we have. Some city councils require that the public wait until after the meeting to engage in public comment. We allow it before the meeting and on every agenda item. And, you know, people can phrase it as a question. The other thing that becomes challenging here is that we have had people come and angrily direct questions to staff. And I appreciate the mayor when he says, address us, right? Like we're the ones up front who are supposed to be addressed at that time. We directly take the heat, even though it's indirectly maybe sent towards staff. And I think it should stay that way, actually. So, and I think some of the concern might have been regarding work sessions or commission meetings specifically. So maybe there's something to be addressed with that. But I think the council rules as they are, I think, should stay the way they are.
Yeah.
Alex?
Thank you. I was going to build on, I think, the work session thing too, because Ann Fuhrer has also mentioned a couple of times that it's hard for, I mean, you all are our top-notch citizens. You come to work sessions, you come to our
We're
retreats.
not afraid of you.
We're glad to see you.
I'm happy to have you.
Not that I'm biased or anything. But I mean, schedules are hard. Our meetings are not always fun or entertaining. And you sit through all of them and then you can't participate. And I am thinking specifically of work sessions or the retreat. So I think the rock and the hard place that we're between that maybe we can noodle on is, where are we okay with sunshine laws to allow at like a work session, a Q&A time or a public participation time where we can put that in our agenda? And I can feel like I know how hard work sessions are to schedule and retreats are to schedule because our schedules are not great. But right, like maybe if it's even 15 or 20 extra minutes to think through what are some ways that we can offer that direct engagement in those venues. Because I think what I was hearing, and again, not to put words in your mouth, is that the request is space for dialogue, good faith dialogue. And maybe that's a venue we could explore.
Yeah, it may be so. I think we live in a very litigious society.
Yeah.
And in the heat of some of the meetings that we've had on face masks, on mass gatherings during the COVID pandemic, on women's right to choose, there have been a number of those that were very emotional and very high. And I think with the emotions going and people were throwing insults in some cases, and if they then asked a question, I don't want to have a counselor give an emotional, immediate response to that, and then have that be the basis for litigation against us, which we know from current example can happen. So I would rather, if people had questions, always bring us questions and commentary. We love it. And I think if you have a question that you think that needs an answer, please say that. This is something I'd really like to get an answer to, and give us the opportunity to investigate it and give you a good answer to it, and not one that's in the heat of the moment. That would be my take on it. Okay.
If others are willing to look at the work session thing, I mean, that to me can be handled different ways. You know, when I was planning commission chair, people, if you had a crowd, you couldn't do it, but it was more of a dialogue with people who were stakeholders. They informed your process, and we've adopted a little bit more of a no, this is a no questions answered thing. So to me, if there was a more meaningful change, it's there, because we're making decisions in a work session, in a retreat, and
If we have, I think if we have a retreat or a work session where we're not up against the beginning of the meeting, then I think I would be happy to ask for public comment. I think when they're before the meeting, it gives people an opportunity to then come up during public comments and say, hey, you were just talking about something, and I have this comment, and I have a question that you ought to look into. I think that can happen now. But I think if they're standalone meetings, like our budget sessions or something like that, I think we could work in a way to have a public comment session. That doesn't need to be rules of council.
Where it could be proportional by time. If you had a
Yeah.
30-minute work session, you could dedicate 10% of the time to question. Like, there'd be some way to keep a lid on it because you could have an angry crowd at a work session too.
How would you judge who gets to speak?
I don't know, the devil's in the details.
Yeah,
This is why we end up with categorical rules. But I can, we have categorical rules prevent something happening when most of the time it's like this. So maybe we don't need categorical, maybe it's more a cultural thing of when it's not a.
I don't think there's any rule that prohibits me asking for comments, is there, Chris?
In a work session?
No.
In a work session?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I mean, I think that
It's
So-
usually our time limit.
Yeah, so
We need to
that's something we
schedule
can do
longer
without.
work sessions.
Without a change in our.
And we've done that before. I can remember it was something
Yeah.
where people were obviously in the audience and want to talk about it, and we're like, wait, can we ask for them to come back up?
Yeah,
So
and we did.
Yeah.
We did it at a budget work session too.
Yeah.
And I think the very purpose of a work session is to have discussion that's intended to get input from stakeholders in your constituency.
Right.
So that's a logical outgrowth of that concept.
Yeah, I think so. Do I hear any requests for legislation?
I'm not gonna, based on the conversation, I think it would not succeed, so.
Okay.
not gonna.
All right. In that case, I would like to have us move on to the final item, which is announcements and communications, and I'll begin with City Manager Elliott.
I just have one comment. Basically, Jessica and I and Rena Murphy attended the OCMA conference last week, and I wanted to share with you that Jessica and Rena put on a presentation called Small Town Big Climate Goals, and they did an excellent job of sharing with the group what some of the things are that we're doing here in Oxford, and I suggested to her that maybe we should put that on for council. You all know about the programs that we're doing and what our aspirations are, but I think it would be good for the public to see it, so we might try to schedule that. And like I told Jessica and Rena, they did an excellent job. So we also had a chance at the conference to listen to the former city manager of San Antonio, Texas, Cheryl Scully, who went to Texas, I think it was in the late 1990s, and one of the issues she had to deal with there was the fire and police labor agreements. One of the issues they had in their agreements was that the police and firefighters were not contributing anything for their health insurance. And she did, and her staff did some projections to show that was going to basically bankrupt the city of San Antonio and crowd out other spending. And so, they went through negotiations to try to get that changed. And during negotiations, the fire union decided to attack her personally. It was very vicious, and it was interesting to hear her stories. I mean, a lot of cities are dealing with the same kinds of issues, not so much of that magnitude, but dealing with labor agreements and then difficult to resolve. But what happened was that during these personal attacks, the fire union proposed some changes to their charter, which basically said that the city manager serves an unlimited term, but is limited only to serving for 8 years. And also wanted to put a cap on the salary of the city manager, and it passed. So, you know, it was an interesting, the title of her book is Greedy Bastards. Now, she wasn't calling the fire and police union that, but they called her and council that because they felt like that they were squeezing them too much. But it was an interesting presentation, but it was a good conference. So that's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thanks. Chief Jones? Okay. Heidi? Chief Deathridge? Casey? Hello. Okay, that's good. Sam?
As an update on the tobacco enforcement legislation, I don't know if you heard or if we've sent an update, I can't recall, but because of the preemption that the state has on the licensing program, we are planning to do the underage sales enforcement only, and we're in process of interviewing a couple candidates, some good candidates, so hopefully we'll have somebody by the end of this month to also be helping us with code enforcement as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica? Heidi?
Heather.
Did I say Heidi again? Heather.
To give an update on our independent counsel's investigation, by definition, since it's independent, I don't get much involved on anything other than on the periphery of that. It's my understanding from the call that I made, just to kind of get a status report and an overview, that I believe the interviews are complete or almost done. I believe they are actively in the process of beginning a draft of a report. I do not believe, I asked them, can you give me a time frame, and they were somewhat vague, but just being a lawyer and knowing how those things are, and anybody who's written a report will appreciate it, I don't think it will be ready for the next council meeting. However, I do believe it will be ready for the first council meeting in April. I posed this question to you not for comment, although you may have questions, but I think at the next council meeting, it might be helpful if you think about what you would want to do with that report. So for example, I could envision that you might ask independent counsel to come after the report's there, you've had a time to review it, and that there could be a question and answer that you might have regarding the findings that they make or anything else related to that. That certainly was contemplated to be within the scope of the engagement. And if that's something that you want, I can follow up with that, and then we can put some parameters on that.
Yes, please.
Keeping in mind that they weren't directly retained to do anything other than address the incident itself. They weren't directly hired to say, this is a policy change I might make. I think they might be willing to share some observations they have, anecdotally, but that really would be beyond their role. But I think that conversation could go, have some legs to it, as it were.
Okay.
Can I ask a question here real quick?
Yeah.
I thought in previous discussion about what their role would be, that they would likely add policy recommendations to the report. Is that accurate?
I think they would comment on questions, but their engagement was not to determine whether the policy was a good, bad standard of what police practice was. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't form an independent opinion based upon what they observed on. I mean, we're kind of getting to a gray area. Because when you think about what the policy is, the policy is the policy.
They were looking at whether the policy was followed.
Correct. But I can't speak to them on that, other than they're savvy enough to understand that it doesn't close the door to a discussion on a broader sense, because it's a matter of community concern. They will have some opinions, and I suspect that they might be willing to make recommendations in a broader sense of, you might want to discuss these points. Okay? You may want to discuss, for example, the Dayton Daily News last week. The Ohio Attorney General's office has come out to say, in Ohio, we have discovered that we think that there's a deficiency in how officers are trained, and there hasn't been enough focus on de-escalation techniques. That may be an appropriate conversation.
Sounds like maybe we want a work session before we have I don't know how else it would be presented.
Can we
And that-
request policy recommendations be added? It was my understanding they didn't have any obligation, that it was likely to occur, that they would address some of that.
Again, I can't speak for them, but I think that I don't know how this process could happen when there wouldn't be some questions that would go beyond the report. But their opinions would be more personal, because their findings are their findings.
Sure, there's objective response to
Right.
what our policy is and whether it was met or not.
Yes.
But then also, since they're informed on legal matters and such issues, I would love to get as much information and expert
Yeah.
opinion on that as possible. And in addition to an engagement in real time, which I was going to ask for before you mentioned it.
Right.
But yeah, I would love a report and a question and answer session of some sort.
Correct, because I think the report itself would be confined to the scope of the engagement. But they recognize it would be,
Is that one of us?
Hope not.
so I think we're saying the same thing. I just can't speak
Yeah.
to the depth of it. And I do think that the work session is probably a good idea.
Okay, super. Michael?
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Okay.
I have a couple of things. I was lucky enough to be a judge at Social Innovation Weekend held at the Farmer School of Business. Michael Conger and several other faculty members and his students all participated. And I heard, several other City of Oxford folks were involved. But it was a really great room of people to be in. And I will, to keep a long story short, saw some really incredible presentations. And just as Dr. Conger put it, just seeing the students, he's an Oxford resident and works at Miami, obviously, seeing the students care so much and start to understand that Oxford is a community that they live in. It's not just Party Fest for the school year, and that Oxford goes beyond the bounds of where Uptown ends for them. It was enough to almost move you to tears, is to really see the students embrace their community. Another thing that was really great that happened at Social Innovation Weekend is Olivia Herron, who is Miami University's Director of Sustainability, had a really great setup where she had people watching the trash cans to make sure that people were composting, recycling, and throwing
Yeah,
waste away
she did a great
appropriately.
job.
She did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
She gave the numbers before the judges' lunch on Sunday, and the amount that they saved from landfills and were able to donate was truly incredible. And from one sustainability expert to another, shout out to Rena Murphy. She and I met to talk about how to reduce as much waste as possible for the space race, which will be the Sunday morning of Eclipse weekend. So we're talking about compostable cups and trash bags and really thinking through how we can be thoughtful, which is great. It's an event that will be in our parks and on our trails, so we want to reduce as much impact as possible. Speaking of the space race, we have our swag finalized. We are going to have a water bottle that is purple with the space race logo on it. We'll have a very cool sticker, and the medals are here. They look incredibly cool. So if you want to walk on our trails and get a medal for it on Sunday, April 7th at 9 a.m., please register. The link is all over the place when it comes to the promotion events. And then lastly, speaking of the Eclipse, I just want to make sure that everybody saw the email that came from Seth Kropenbaker during the week at some point to just start to get folks to wrap their head around what the Eclipse weekend is going to look like for us. It's an incredible once-in-a-lifetime thing that we get to live through, but I'm sure both chiefs would really appreciate it if we use our heads and just do nice, calm, logical things and don't panic. It will all be great. It will all be fine, but definitely check out that email. There's some great resources, and that's all for me.
Thank you.
Nothing tonight.
Yes, we saw a lot of data during our work session related to fire and EMS, but sometimes I think a story can encapsulate as much as or more than data can. And so I want to share a story that staff and council has heard, I know the chief has heard. Back in the fall, I was on one of the wonderful architectural walking tours, and I was on University in town, and it was one of the fathers' weekends. So there were dads in town and what have you, and as we were at the very tail end of our tour, a young woman and her friend who were walking into their house with a dog, there was another larger dog across the street that came bolting across the street to attack the little dog. One of the students tried to protect her little dog and was bitten on the calf by the larger dog. And so fortunately, she was right by her house, went to her house. Her uncle happened to be in town. I went in there to see what help they needed and called 911. And I remember when the EMS came, they were really attentive. They were in the house. I stayed outside of the house to give them room. But there was a young woman who was there with the brigade, and she just seemed really out of it. There was this kind of vacant look in her eyes. She was there in her uniform, and one of the adults that was staying at the house was trying to engage her with a conversation, and she just wasn't responsive at all. It was strange enough to me that I said to my husband when I went home, I need to talk to Chief Dethridge about what was going on there, because I've never seen someone, I know how our public safety professionals operate, and this was just something I'd never seen before. It was to the point where the adult, the visitor, the uncle, just kind of walked away from her and said, oh, I guess you can't answer my questions. And so at one of our meetings, I asked Chief what was going on, and I described the young woman, and he looked at his records, and he said that she had just worked like pretty much close to a 48-hour shift. And she was exhausted, she was burnt out, and then told me later that we had just lost her to another area, that she left. That's the cost of the exhaustion that our fire and EMS are under. They're not able to engage with the public the way they would like to. And I don't know what story that gentleman is walking away with. Again, fortunately, the people who went in the house were present, were engaged, but we need to really think about this. And think about the health and safety of our EMS, firefighters, officers, and the impression that that leaves with families, parents, students who need their help here in Oxford. You cannot pour from an empty jug. This jug is empty, it's getting empty, and so we really need to address this, and that's it.
Thank you, Amber.
Yeah.
Looking at global affairs, I feel like every day I think a ceasefire is right around the corner with Israel and Palestine, and it hasn't happened yet. So I'd just like to throw my support for that big issue behind a ceasefire, and hopefully more than limited airdrop aid relief can get in there, because there are many struggling, famished Palestinian families that could use some aid.
Thank you.
First, just to echo Councilor Franklin's, I know that we keep showing spreadsheets, but to me, the breakthrough idea was like, well, why is this the problem? They're on a shift, like you're working, you're doing a lot of calls, but it was like, wait, they need to sleep during that shift too. They work a 24-hour because it's premised on sleep. I think we do, as we communicate, we need to tell the human story, because I think the dollars don't communicate it as effectively as the idea of a person who's working a job where they're supposed to be getting some sleep during their shift and they just don't, and why they would leave us. So, quick question you don't need to answer today. It's not an inquiry you have to answer tonight. It's too bad about our tobacco legislation being preempted, but there was always an alternative, which was to using our zoning code to regulate the land use and not the tobacco as a product. So I'm not an expert in the new legislation, but this prohibits us from regulating the products. But I hope that we can take a look at the use of our land use code, which if anything is home rule bound, and we should defend it to the hilt, is our ability to regulate land uses with zoning. And if we can use zoning to at least, do some of the locational things that was in our tobacco regulation, because it's been awesome, because as some of those businesses have gone out, rather than go back another vape place, we now have family-oriented businesses in there. So I don't want us to give up because that pathway that we chose is preempted, because I think there are other pathways, and I hope that we explore them. That's just my hope. So thank you.
Okay. Couple of quick comments. I think the comments about Eclipse Weekend are really important, and I think that we need to be aware that people who are in, let's say, Cincinnati, who are not in the area of totality, if they want to get to the area of totality, one of the logical places for them to come, and we've got so much going on, is going to be Oxford, that there could be a whole lot of people in this town. I think parking will be at a premium. I think local residents who can walk, bike, or otherwise are advised to do so. I think we should think about satellite parking lots and shuttling people in potentially. So I think those are things that I hope staff will be looking at. But I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait. The other thing I just wanted to mention briefly is we have 2 sister cities. And one of our sister cities is Differding, Luxembourg. Some people may call it Differdange, but it's Differding is how they pronounce it. And they are having an annual, well, a biannual, is that every 2 years? Every couple of years, they have an event where they invite all of their sister cities to come, and so the city manager and I will be attending that and wishing them well. Our other sister city is Dubno, Ukraine. And I would hope that everybody in our community would hold them a little bit tighter in their thoughts, because you mentioned the horrible situation with the Palestinians being massacred and the Jewish people in Israel who were attacked. I mean, that's just a horrible situation, but it is equally horrible that some of our national leaders in Congress have decided to make support for democracy in Ukraine, support for a country trying to defend itself against a madman who wants to take over probably the world, that they don't want to fund them. And they're now in desperate straits. So please hold the people of Dubno in your hearts. And if you think about it, maybe look on social media for Dubno and see some of the wonderful things that they put out about things that are going on in their community, and some of the memorials that are held for many of the people who are citizens of this little town like ours, who now they're running out of room to put memorials for them in their city park. So please think about those people, please. And with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.